There's something unsettling about restaurants, isn't there? The way strangers sit so close, the dim glow of flickering lights, the quiet hum of conversations that sometimes sound not quite human. You walk in hungry, expecting a meal. But what if something else is waiting for you? What if the kitchen holds more than just food? What if the whispers in the back aren't from the staff? Tonight, I'm bringing you 5 disturbing true restaurant horror stories. Tales so terrifying they'll make you think twice before dining out again. Each story is darker than the last, filled with eerie encounters, unexplainable events, and places that should have never existed. So, if you're brave enough, stay with me until the end. But I warn you, after this, you may never look at a restaurant the same way again. Watch the full video if you dare. A couple of years ago, my friend David visited an old restaurant that had long been the subject of local lore, a place known for its comforting food and warm smiles. The restaurant, called The Hearth, was tucked away on a quiet side street, its red brick facade and frosted windows promising an inviting refuge from the chill of the night. David, ever the adventurous soul with a taste for nostalgia, decided to try it out one evening. What he encountered that night, however, was something that still gives him shivers. The night was cool, and as David approached the restaurant, he noted how the glow from the street lamps made the building seem almost ethereal. He pushed open the heavy wooden door and was greeted immediately by a man at the front desk, a host with a kind smile and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. But what startled David was when the host said in a friendly tone, "Welcome back, David. We've been expecting you." David paused. He had never been here before. Yet somehow, the host's warm welcome felt personal, as if the restaurant had known him all along. Shrugging off the unease, he was led into a cozy dining room bathed in soft, ambient light and gentle music playing in the background. The decor was vintage yet comforting, with deep burgundy drapes, antique furnishings, and small, flickering candles placed on every table. As he walked further into the room, David noticed something unusual. Each table was set for one. No matter where you sat, there was a single plate, a neatly folded napkin, and a silver spoon waiting as if for an invisible guest. When he reached his own table, a subtle chill ran down his spine. The setting was perfect for a quiet meal, yet the emptiness of the opposite seat felt oddly imposing. David sat down and took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The menu, written in flowing cursive, offered an array of traditional dishes, each sounding more comforting than the last. He ordered the house special, a bowl of soup that had earned a reputation for its rich flavor and restorative qualities. Soon enough, a server in a crisp white apron glided silently to his table, placing the steaming bowl before him with a nod. There was no verbal greeting, only the gentle clatter of dishes as the server retreated. As David took his first spoonful, he was hit by an unexpected taste, a metallic tang that disrupted the warm, savory broth. The flavor was strange, and with every subsequent spoonful, he could almost hear a series of soft, indistinct voices whispering just beyond the edge of hearing. They seemed to rise from the very walls of the restaurant, as if the building itself was recounting its tragic past. David's fork clinked against the porcelain bowl, the sound echoing in the silence that had grown heavier around him. Trying to dismiss his rising anxiety as mere imagination, he continued eating. But with each bite, the whispers became clearer, forming words that he couldn't quite decipher. It was as if the soup carried with it fragments of old conversations, snatches of sorrow, regret, and unresolved longing. The atmosphere grew denser, and the once comforting light now cast eerie shadows that danced around him. David glanced across the empty seat, half expecting to see someone there, and for a fleeting moment, he swore he saw a shadow move. After finishing his meal, David called for the check. A few moments later, a small slip of paper was placed in front of him. He picked it up, noticing that it contained just one line in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Your company has been noted." A chill passed through him. It was as if the restaurant had recorded his presence in a ledger of lost souls, a permanent mark that could not be erased. Feeling suddenly exposed, David left the restaurant in haste. Outside, the night air was sharp and brisk, offering a welcome contrast to the oppressive warmth of the dining room. He tried to shake off the unsettling experience, convincing himself it was nothing more than a trick of his tired mind. a product of too many late nights and too much isolation. However, as he walked home, an inexplicable sensation of being followed crept over him. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, he caught sight of something, a figure barely visible in the periphery, moving silently through the darkness. The sensation grew stronger, and soon he felt that unseen eyes were watching him, tracking his every step. The footsteps behind him, faint and irregular, seemed to echo the soft clinks and whispers he had heard in the restaurant. That night, sleep was a distant memory. David lay in bed, wide awake, his mind racing with questions about what had truly happened at the hearth. The voices from the soup, the personal greeting by the host, the solitary table, all of it played over and over in his head. Was the restaurant somehow alive, a vessel for the souls of those who had met tragic ends? And if so, had it reached out to him specifically, inviting him into its dark embrace? Days turned into weeks, and the haunting presence persisted. Wherever David went, he felt that spectral company lingering close by. Shadows in the corner of his eye seemed to shift into shapes that resembled the empty chair at his table, and soft murmurs would occasionally drift on the wind, carrying the cryptic message. "Your company has been noted." Friends began to notice that David was different, more withdrawn, haunted by an invisible burden. He avoided late nights and deserted places, terrified that the restaurant's curse might follow him wherever he went. Determined to uncover the truth, David returned to the hearth one evening. He wanted answers. Why had the restaurant seemed to know him, and what did that single line on the check mean? When he entered, the familiar warmth and gentle music greeted him, but the cozy facade was now tainted with an undercurrent of dread. The host was there again, smiling as if nothing was amiss. "Welcome back, David," the host said, his tone as calm as ever. "Your usual table is waiting." David's eyes scanned the room. Every table was still set for one. He sat down at the same solitary table and ordered the soup once more. As he waited, he could feel the eyes of the restaurant upon him, heavy and unyielding. The server returned, placing the bowl in front of him with the same silent precision. This time, David did not eat. Instead, he stared at the bowl, listening as the faint whispers began to stir once again. In a trembling voice, David asked, "What do you want from me?" The whispers paused, and for a moment, a profound silence fell over the room. Then, the host appeared at his table. Leaning in close, as if sharing a secret meant only for him, the host whispered, "You were chosen to remember. This place, this meal, it is a rite. Every time you dine here, you remember the lost souls who have been forgotten by the world." David's heart pounded in his chest. "Chosen for what? Why me?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of fear and desperation. The host's smile was enigmatic. "Every guest who sits alone here is a reminder that we are all solitary beings, burdened by memories and regrets. Tonight, you have been given the chance to carry their stories with you, to ensure that their voices are never silenced. Your company is noted not as a curse, but as a sacred duty." The words made no sense, yet they resonated with a haunting truth. David felt a weight settle over him, a responsibility he had not asked for but could not escape. As he left the restaurant that night, he realized that the feeling of being followed, the spectral presence that had haunted him, was not a punishment but a reminder of the lives intertwined with his own. Now, even years later, David can't shake the sensation that he is never truly alone. In quiet moments, when the night is at its darkest, he hears the soft clink of cutlery and the murmur of voices, as if 1,000 lost souls are sharing their stories through him. And though he has learned to live with the eerie company that follows him, a part of him will always wonder what it means to have your company noted. A message that forever binds you to a legacy of sorrow, memory, and the unyielding pull of the past. In that old restaurant, every table set for one tells a story. And for David, his solitary table has become a symbol of a haunting truth. That some places and experiences mark us in ways we can never forget, and that sometimes the past reaches out to remind us that we are all, in the end, alone with our memories. On the outskirts of a small, sleepy town, there stood a quaint bistro known as La Lure. Its brick facade, warmed by decades of tradition, hid a secret as old as the town itself. For generations, the family that owned La Lure guarded a recipe said to be stolen from a dark ritual centuries ago. a dish so extraordinary that it had drawn curious locals and adventurous foodies alike. Among them was Michael, a popular food blogger known for his fearless pursuit of culinary secrets. Michael had heard the whispers. Locals claimed that the signature dish, simply called the Legacy, was more than a meal. It was an invocation of ancient powers, a recipe that demanded a terrible price. Skeptical yet intrigued, Michael set out one crisp autumn afternoon to uncover the truth behind the cursed recipe. The bistro's interior was charmingly rustic. Antique wooden tables bore the scars of many meals past, and the air was heavy with the mingling aromas of roasted herbs and simmering sauces. Michael was greeted by Madame Lucille, the stern but graceful matriarch of the family, whose eyes seemed to hold both sorrow and pride. She welcomed him warmly, her voice soft but firm, as if each word was a measured part of a long-forgotten incantation. "Welcome to La Lure, Michael," she said, almost as if she had expected him. "Tonight, you will taste our legacy. But remember, some recipes are not meant to be understood, only experienced." Michael's heart pounded with excitement and a hint of unease as he settled into a corner booth. The table was set for one, though the bistro was bustling with other patrons, all seemingly content with their own plates of comfort. Soon, a dish arrived at Michael's table, an unassuming plate piled high with what looked like a hearty stew, its aroma rich and inviting yet laced with an indefinable edge of something darker. He took his first bite, and instantly his senses were overwhelmed. The flavors exploded on his tongue, notes of tender meat, vibrant vegetables, and a sauce that carried a strange metallic tang. Almost immediately, his vision blurred. The room around him dissolved into a maelstrom of color and sound. He saw flashes of red, too bright, too vivid, like splashes of blood on a canvas of despair. His ears filled with distant screams, echoes of agony that seemed to come from a place beyond time. In the midst of the chaos, Michael found himself in a surreal banquet hall. Ghostly figures, dressed in tattered finery, gathered around long tables under flickering candlelight. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths twisted in silent cries. It was as if the very souls of the dead had been summoned to feast, a twisted banquet where the price of every bite was measured in pain and torment. He struggled to comprehend the horror of the visions, but they were too potent. Each spoonful of stew dredged up memories and images that were not his own. As the sensory onslaught subsided, Michael was left gasping in his seat, drenched in sweat and trembling from the shock. He forced himself to swallow the final morsels of the dish, desperate for clarity, for an explanation. But the explanation was elusive, hidden behind layers of myth and dread. That night, Michael returned to his modest hotel room, his mind still reeling from the experience. The flavors of the legacy haunted him, mingling with the spectral images that now occupied his thoughts. As he drifted into a restless sleep, he found himself pulled into a nightmarish dream. In the dream, he was back in the bistro's kitchen, a place he had never seen during his visit. The kitchen was dimly lit and eerily silent, the air thick with the scent of spices and something far fouler, decay. Before him stood a shadowy figure. It was a man, or what once might have been a man, draped in a stained apron that whispered of countless meals prepared with care and terror. The figure's face was obscured by shadows, but his eyes burned with an intense, almost supernatural fire. The silent figure began to recite words in a low, rhythmic chant, his voice echoing like distant thunder. Michael couldn't understand the words, but he felt their meaning seep into his bones. A warning, a curse. The figure gestured to a massive, bubbling cauldron in the center of the room. From it emanated a dark, viscous sauce that shimmered with a life of its own. The figure's incantations grew louder, more insistent, as if each word was a thread in a web of fate. Every time the dish is served, the figure intoned, a soul is claimed in its name. His voice was both a command and a lament, resonating deep within Michael's soul. The dream shifted abruptly, and Michael saw visions of those countless souls, faces contorted in anguish, reaching out in desperate plea, as they were drawn inexorably toward the cauldron. Michael woke up with a start, his heart hammering against his chest. The room was silent, yet he couldn't shake the haunting echoes of the dream. Still disoriented, he forced himself to rise and wander over to the small window. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking through the night's gloom. As he gazed out, a glimmer caught his eye. There, on the cold, wet pavement below, was a puddle of spilled gravy. For a moment, Michael stared in disbelief. In that murky reflection, he saw his own face, but it was not smiling. His expression was twisted in a grimace of horror, eyes wide and unseeing. It was as if the soul captured in the dish had been imprinted on his reflection, a permanent mark of the curse he now carried. Panic seized him. Michael rushed to the door, determined to leave the bistro, to escape the invisible grip that had ensnared him. But when he pulled on the handle, it would not budge. The door was locked, and no matter how hard he tried, it remained stubbornly closed. He banged on it, calling out for help, but the bistro offered no response. It was as if the building itself had become a trap, a prison from which there was no escape. In the days that followed, Michael found himself tormented by memories of that cursed meal. His blog posts, once filled with witty observations and culinary adventures, turned dark and foreboding. Every time he attempted to write about his experience at La Lure, he was haunted by the lingering taste of the legacy and the spectral visions that had accompanied it. His readers noticed the change, their comments a mixture of concern and morbid fascination. Rumors began to spread. Locals said that the bistro had been built on ancient ground, a place where old rituals and forgotten curses still held sway. They whispered that the secret recipe had been stolen from a forbidden ritual, a meal prepared not merely to sate hunger, but to capture the essence of a living soul. And each time the dish was served, a piece of a person's spirit was forever bound to the recipe, destined to wander in eternal torment. Michael's nightmares persisted. The shadowy figure in the stained apron appeared to him in every dream, reciting his terrible incantation over and over. In each vision, Michael felt the crushing weight of the curse, as if every bite he had taken had sealed his fate. He began to lose sleep, his eyes dark and haunted, his once bright curiosity replaced by a deep-seated dread. Desperate for answers and a way to break the curse, Michael returned to La Lure one rainy evening. The bistro's familiar facade loomed before him like a dark sentinel, and he hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. This time, however, the atmosphere was even more oppressive. The usual warmth had been replaced by a suffocating chill, and the soft hum of conversation was conspicuously absent. He sought out Madame Lucille, who regarded him with a knowing sadness. "You have tasted what should not be tasted," she said quietly. "The recipe was never meant for mortal palates. It is a relic of a time when the veil between our world and the next was thin. Now you must live with what you have consumed." Michael pleaded with her for a remedy, for a way to undo the terrible binding. But Madame Lucille's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "Some curses cannot be broken, only born. Your soul is now intertwined with the legacy of this dish. Every time it is served, you will feel its pull." That night, as Michael left the bistro for what might have been the last time, he heard desperate whispers coming from the kitchen. The sound was faint, a sorrowful murmur that spoke of eternal longing and unfulfilled lives. It was a sound that would forever echo in his mind, a reminder of the cursed recipe and the price he had unwittingly paid. To this day, the legend of La Lure endures. Locals claim that if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can hear the faint, desperate whispers from the kitchen, as if the ghosts of those lost souls are still waiting for their final release. And for Michael, every meal, every reflection in a darkened window, serves as a constant reminder of that fateful bite, a taste of a curse that will never be undone. In the heart of a bustling city, where neon lights met midnight dreams, there existed a trendy restaurant known as Eclipse. With its sleek modern decor, innovative dishes, and a reputation for pushing culinary boundaries, Eclipse was the kind of place that drew foodies, artists, and anyone with a taste for the extraordinary. Yet behind its chic facade and lively chatter, whispered rumors of a mysterious figure, a waiter who never spoke, had begun to circulate among the staff and a few regulars. One cool autumn evening, a young woman named Claire decided to dine at Eclipse. Having recently moved to the city, Claire was eager to explore its hidden corners, hoping that a night out might ease the loneliness that sometimes crept into her heart. The restaurant was buzzing with conversation, the clink of glasses mingling with soft jazz tunes that filled the air. Despite the upbeat atmosphere, a subtle chill seemed to hang over one corner of the room. A corner where a figure in a dark uniform moved silently between the tables. From the moment Claire stepped through the ornate glass doors, she felt as though someone was watching her. At first, she dismissed the sensation as nerves or the excitement of trying somewhere new. But as she was led to her table, a cozy nook tucked away from the central din, the feeling grew more pronounced. Her table was set with crisp white linens, a single lit candle, and a small vase of fresh flowers. Everything appeared immaculate, yet an unspoken tension lurked just beneath the surface. As Claire settled in, she noticed a waiter gliding gracefully between the tables. He was unnervingly pale, with an almost translucent complexion, and his eyes were fixed in a blank stare that seemed to follow her every move. Unlike the other staff, he never smiled or greeted anyone with the usual pleasantries. His silence was striking, and his presence, though quiet, carried a weight that Claire couldn't ignore. The evening progressed as Claire ordered her meal, a series of dishes known for their innovative combinations and unexpected flavors. With every course, however, a peculiar transformation seemed to take place. The first course arrived with a flourish, a delicate salad drizzled with an unusual, iridescent dressing. Yet as she took her first bite, the flavors shifted unnaturally, as if the dish were absorbing her emotions. A tang of bitterness crept in where sweetness should have been, and the salad seemed to lose its freshness, turning almost cold and lifeless. Before she could ponder the oddity, the silent waiter appeared at her table. He didn't speak. Instead, he placed a small folded note on her plate and continued on his path, disappearing as silently as he had come. Claire unfolded the note with trembling fingers. In neat, almost desperate handwriting, it read, "Silence hides the truth." The words sent a shiver down her spine, and she felt as though the note were both a warning and a secret, a puzzle that needed solving. Trying to shake off the unease, Claire focused on her next course, a warm bowl of soup, steaming and aromatic. But as she lifted her spoon, the flavors were even more disturbing. The soup tasted metallic, and with each sip, she felt a strange numbness spread through her limbs. It was as if the dish was leaching a part of her vitality, leaving her both emotionally and physically drained. The other diners around her laughed and chatted, oblivious to the sinister change that seemed to envelop her. Once again, the silent waiter made his presence known. He stood by her table, his gaze never wavering, and placed another note next to the bowl. This time, the message was different. In the quiet, the past speaks. The cryptic sentence muddled Claire's thoughts even further. What could it mean? Had the restaurant always harbored such secrets? Or was there something more personal about this note? By now, Claire felt a growing sense of dread. The vibrant energy of the restaurant had given way to an inexplicable emptiness that seemed to hover around her. With each new dish, her emotions and energy appeared to be siphoned away, as though the food were not merely nourishment, but a conduit for something dark and ancient. The silent waiter continued his eerie routine, appearing, leaving a note, and then vanishing into the shadows before anyone else could notice. As the final course, a rich, decadent dessert, was served, Claire's unease reached a fever pitch. The dessert was a masterpiece of culinary art, its presentation immaculate, yet its taste was hollow. It lacked the expected sweetness, and instead, Claire perceived a lingering sorrow that seemed to echo with every bite. The transformation in the food was now undeniable. The dishes were reacting to something deeper than flavor. They were mirroring the very essence of the diners' souls. Desperation clawed at Claire's chest. She no longer felt like a guest enjoying a night out, but rather a pawn in a game far beyond her understanding. With trembling hands, she reached for the note left beside her dessert. The message was clear, though its implications were shrouded in mystery. The silence consumes all. At that moment, she realized that the silent waiter was not simply an odd employee. He was a harbinger, a spectral figure drawing energy and life from the patrons, leaving them diminished and haunted by the residue of their own suppressed emotions. Summoning every ounce of courage, Claire decided to confront him. She rose from her chair and scanned the room, determined to find the enigmatic figure. The restaurant was now quieter than before. Even the background music had softened to a mere murmur. She searched near the bar and by the entrance, but there was no sign of him, only a lingering shadow that seemed to mock her futile quest. Returning to her table, Claire found the silent waiter had left one last note, placed carefully atop her now cooling dessert. With a heavy heart and a trembling hand, she unfolded the final message. "In your silence, we are bound." The words resonated deep within her, as if they were an incantation linking her fate to the mysterious entity that had stalked her throughout the meal. In that moment, Claire felt the weight of unseen eyes bearing down on her, a crushing pressure that left her gasping for breath. The restaurant, once a beacon of modern vibrancy, now felt like a tomb, a place where laughter and joy had been replaced by a void filled with sorrow and despair. The other patrons, though still present, seemed distant and disconnected, as if their vitality had been leached away by the very walls of Eclipse. When Claire finally left the restaurant, the cool night air offered no relief. The haunting presence followed her, lingering just beyond the edge of her vision. She walked briskly, trying to outrun the feeling that something dark and ancient had attached itself to her soul. That night, and many nights thereafter, she struggled with an overwhelming sense of emptiness, a constant reminder of that fateful meal. The next day, the reviews of Eclipse took a strange turn. Regular diners spoke of an inexplicable void that had crept into the restaurant, a silence that had replaced the usual hum of conversation. Critics noted that the place, once alive with energy and laughter, now exuded a melancholy that no amount of modern flair or innovative dishes could mask. Rumors spread quickly through the city, and the legend of the silent waiter grew with each passing day. Claire, now deeply disturbed by her experience, began researching the history of Eclipse. What she discovered only deepened her horror. The restaurant had been built on the site of an old, abandoned hotel, a place rumored to have been the gathering ground for lost souls and broken dreams. It seemed that the silent waiter was more than just a quirky employee. He was a remnant of a darker past, a specter tasked with ensuring that the memories of sorrow and loss would never be forgotten. Years later, whenever Claire passed by Eclipse, she would catch a glimpse of a pale figure moving silently among the tables. A reminder of that night when the silence had spoken louder than any words ever could. And although she tried to forget, the cryptic messages and the draining presence of the silent waiter continued to haunt her, a perpetual echo of a dinner that had changed her life forever. In the end, Eclipse remained a place of both culinary brilliance and unspeakable mystery, a restaurant where every dish carried not just flavor, but the weight of a haunted past, and where the silence truly hid a truth that no one could ever escape. In a small town shrouded in secrets and forgotten memories, there was a diner that opened only at midnight. The neon sign above its door, though old and flickering, burned with a ghostly light that beckoned travelers and lost souls alike. Locals always said that when the clock struck 12, a silence deeper than night itself fell over the streets, a silence that spoke of things best left undisturbed. One cold, rain-soaked night, a weary trucker named Sam pulled his rig off the highway. The engine's hum had long been replaced by a creeping sense of isolation, and the relentless drizzle blurred the line between pavement and puddle. Sam's eyes, tired from endless miles, caught the elusive glow of the diner. With nothing left to lose, he parked his truck and stepped into the cool, damp air, hoping for a warm meal and a moment of solace. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior that seemed frozen in time. There were no cheerful chatter or clinks of cutlery, just a vast, oppressive quiet that made Sam's skin crawl. The diner's decor was a mix of faded red booths and cracked vinyl seats, relics of an era when laughter and music filled the air. Now, only the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant drip of water provided any sound. Drawn toward a single booth in the far corner, Sam's heart began to pound. Sitting there was a man whose appearance was as out of place as a relic in a modern world. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that looked as if it belonged to another century, complete with a worn vest and a neatly tied cravat. What caught Sam's attention even more were the man's eyes. They glowed faintly in the dim light, as if they were lit from within by some eerie, internal flame. The man slowly raised a hand in greeting, inviting Sam to join him at the booth. With little choice and a deep-seated curiosity that mingled with fear, Sam slid into the seat opposite him. The booth's vinyl was cool to the touch, and as he sat down, a shiver crept up his spine. Before Sam could speak, the man leaned forward, his voice soft and deliberate. "Welcome to the Midnight Diner," he said, his tone carrying an old-world accent that sent chills through Sam's body. "I assume you've come seeking comfort in a cold night's journey. But be warned, this diner is no ordinary refuge." Sam's eyes darted around, taking in the deserted surroundings. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man smiled, though it did not reach his glowing eyes. "Long ago, this place was cursed. They say that when the clock strikes midnight, the souls of those who've met tragic ends are drawn here. Their despair, their agony, is woven into every meal served in this very booth. Tonight, you are not just a traveler looking for food. You are a part of the diner's story." As the man spoke, Sam's mind raced. A mix of skepticism and dread battled within him. He tried to dismiss the words as mere superstition, yet something in the tone and the look in the man's eyes left no room for doubt. Without another word, the man called over a server who, like a shadow, moved silently between the tables. Moments later, a plate was set in front of Sam. The dish was unremarkable at first glance. A bowl of stew that looked as though it had been prepared decades ago. Yet the aroma was strange, a pungent mix of spices and something bitter, like the taste of regret. Sam hesitated before taking a bite, but his hunger outweighed his fear. The stew was dense and heavy. Each spoonful seemed to carry the weight of memories long buried. As Sam ate, he felt an unsettling presence lingering in the air. A feeling that each bite was not just food but a token from a time long past, a morsel of sorrow that bound him to the diner's fate. The man's conversation continued, punctuating the silence. "This diner has seen many souls come and go," he murmured. "But each one leaves a piece of themselves behind. The curse binds you to this place, Sam. You cannot leave once you've tasted the truth hidden in these meals." Sam's hands began to tremble. He pushed his bowl away, the uneaten stew now a chilling reminder of the man's words. I need to leave," he stammered, rising from the booth. But as he reached for the door, his hand met an immovable barrier. The door, which had seemed to welcome him minutes before, now stood locked as if by an unseen force. Panic surged through him. He tried the handle again and again, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew heavier, as if the diner itself was closing in around him. The sound of his own heartbeat pounded in his ears, louder than the quiet that enveloped the room. Every second felt stretched, filled with an unyielding dread that made it hard to breathe. "Don't fight it," the man said softly, his eyes never leaving Sam's. "You are meant to understand, to see the truth of our existence. The diner has its way of revealing what lies beneath the surface of our lives. The sorrows we carry, the mistakes we've made, and the inevitability of fate." Sam's heart raced, and for a moment, he felt as if he were a character in a nightmare, trapped in a loop of despair and regret. The walls of the diner seemed to close in, and he could almost hear the whispers of countless lost souls echoing in the silence. As the minutes turned into what felt like hours, Sam's resistance faded into resigned terror. He could do nothing but sit and listen as the mysterious man recounted tales of others who had come seeking refuge at the diner. A long list of souls who had been ensnared by the curse. Each story was punctuated by the same haunting refrain. A promise that they would never leave the Midnight Diner, that their fate was sealed the moment they tasted its bitter fare. Outside, the relentless night pressed on, and the neon sign flickered as if it too was breathing in sync with the diner's dark energy. Sam's mind, overwhelmed by a mounting sense of inevitability, began to accept that escape was no longer an option. He was now part of the diner's tapestry, a living thread woven into a fabric of sorrow and darkness. Just as hope seemed to vanish entirely, the man reached beneath his table and produced a small envelope. With a deliberate calmness that defied the horror of the situation, he slid the envelope across to Sam. Trembling, Sam opened it, revealing a single line of red ink scrawled on a piece of old paper. "You were served." In that moment, the oppressive atmosphere of the diner shifted subtly. The locked door creaked open, as if releasing him from an unseen grip. But as Sam stood up and stepped toward the exit, the diner's silence resumed. A silence that now carried a somber, resigned finality. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. The neon sign flickered one last time before going dark, and the diner's doors closed behind him with a final, echoing thud. Sam staggered into the early morning, his mind forever scarred by the night's events. He could still hear the man's soft voice and feel the weight of that cursed meal pressing upon him. Back in town, as the day began to unfold, the diner stood silent and empty, a relic of the night's terrible secret. The story of the Midnight Diner would soon become another whispered legend among the locals, a tale of a cursed place where the past and present collided in the most unsettling of ways. And though Sam eventually moved on, no matter how far he traveled, the memory of that night remained. In every darkened corner, in every flicker of neon, he saw the faint outline of that mysterious man and felt the chill of the diner's curse. The Midnight Diner had served him a meal that was as much a taste of his own soul as it was a warning. A reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. In the remote town of Red Hollow, where the nights stretched longer than the days and shadows clung to every corner, there was an all-night restaurant called the Midnight Spoon. It was a modest establishment run by a small team of dedicated workers, a beacon for tired travelers and locals who simply couldn't sleep. But the townsfolk whispered that the Midnight Spoon was more than it seemed, that it was built on the ruins of an old asylum, and that the tortured souls of its former patients still roamed its halls. On a particularly bitter autumn evening, when a cold wind howled through the barren streets, a young man named Ethan started his first night shift at the Midnight Spoon. Fresh out of college and in need of work, he had taken the job without asking too many questions. His uniform was crisp, and his smile was eager, masking a nervous excitement about this new beginning. He had no idea that tonight his life would change forever. The restaurant was dimly lit, its vintage decor an odd mix of worn-out leather booths and dusty framed photographs of happier times. As Ethan clocked in, the manager, a tired-eyed woman named Marjorie, gave him a curt nod and said, "Just stick to your stations and keep an eye on the customers. The nights here can be unusual." Her tone hinted at secrets she had long since learned to live with, but she offered no further explanation. The first few hours passed without incident. The diner buzzed with a quiet energy, a blend of hushed conversations and the soft clatter of cutlery on plates. Ethan took orders, refilled drinks, and moved between tables with a practiced efficiency. But as midnight approached, a strange shift occurred. The overhead lights began to flicker, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. The usual hum of conversation dwindled, replaced by an eerie silence punctuated by distant murmurs. At exactly midnight, as if on cue, a low, disembodied voice echoed through the restaurant. It wasn't coming from any speaker or visible source. Instead, it seemed to seep from the very walls. "Welcome to the endless night," the voice intoned, soft yet filled with a sorrow that chilled the bones. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He glanced around at his co-workers, veteran waitress Linda, grizzled cook Ramon, and the quiet host Greg. But none of them seemed particularly alarmed. They exchanged knowing looks and continued their tasks, as if this was just another oddity of the night. As the hours dragged on, strange occurrences became more frequent. Orders were taken by voices that didn't belong to any living waiter. Dishes appeared on tables without a human touch, and at one point, a customer's request for extra napkins was answered by the clatter of unseen footsteps behind him. Ethan's hands trembled as he scribbled down orders. He began to feel an overwhelming presence, as if someone or something was watching him from the dark recesses of the restaurant. The shift grew truly eerie when, around 2 a.m., the kitchen door opened by itself. Ethan, curious and apprehensive, peered into the darkness beyond. There, stretching out before him, was a narrow corridor that seemed to swallow the light. The walls were lined with peeling paint, and the floorboards creaked with each unseen step. A cold draft emanated from the passage, carrying with it whispers of anguish and despair. It was as though the corridor was a portal to another time, a time when the building was not a restaurant, but an asylum where suffering had been the norm. Unable to resist the pull of the mystery, Ethan ventured a few steps into the corridor. His heart pounded in his ears as the whispers grew louder, coalescing into distinct cries of pain and sorrow. He could almost see shadowy figures drifting at the edge of his vision, their faces contorted in silent agony. Terrified, he retreated back to the safety of the kitchen, where the lights flickered again as if to guide him away. In the back of the kitchen, hidden beneath a stack of old menus and forgotten utensils, Ethan discovered a battered leather diary. Its cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. The diary was written in trembling, desperate handwriting, filled with entries that chronicled the terrible events that had taken place in the building long before it became the Midnight Spoon. One entry read, "Every night as the darkness falls, the hungry souls rise. We feed them our despair, and they feed on our sorrow. The endless night is not a curse, but a hunger that can never be sated." Ethan's blood ran cold as he read the entries, each one detailing how the restaurant had become a vessel for the restless spirits of the asylum. The diary told of staff members from decades past who had vanished without a trace, and of customers who had left in a state of shock, murmuring about ghostly figures and voices that lured them into the dark. The last entry, dated over 50 years ago, ended with a final, haunting declaration. "By sunrise, the souls claim what is theirs, and those who serve in the endless night are forever bound to this place." A sudden crash from the dining room startled Ethan out of his grim discovery. He snapped the diary shut and hurried back to the main floor, only to find that the atmosphere had changed once more. The remaining employees were gathered in clusters, their faces ashen and eyes wide with terror. Linda was quietly sobbing in the corner, and Ramon stood stock-still at the stove, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by a haunted stare. Marjorie, the manager, was in the center of the room, addressing the terrified staff in a hushed tone. "Listen to me," she said urgently. "This has happened before. The endless night is upon us, and tonight it's hungry. We must follow the old ways to appease them. There is a ritual, a simple one, but we must do it together." Her voice trembled with both determination and fear. Ethan listened as she explained that the restaurant was built upon the ruins of the asylum, where countless souls had been left to suffer. Their anguish had seeped into the very foundation of the building, binding them to it for eternity. And now, on nights like this, their hunger was awakened. The ritual required the employees to stand together at the stroke of midnight, offering a silent promise to remember the pain of those who had been lost, to honor their memories so that their restless spirits might be pacified. As the clock neared midnight once more, the staff gathered in a circle in the center of the dining room. The lights dimmed further, and an otherworldly chill descended upon them. Ethan's heart pounded as he joined hands with his co-workers, feeling the palpable tension in the air. The voices in the walls grew louder, and for a fleeting moment, the restaurant seemed to blur between the present and the tormented past. In unison, they closed their eyes and silently vowed to honor the lost souls. Outside, the wind howled like 1,000 mournful cries, and the restaurant shuddered as if acknowledging the solemn pledge. For a brief, harrowing instant, time seemed to stand still. And then, as if a heavy curtain had been drawn, the oppressive presence lifted. The lights steadied, the voices faded, and a fragile peace settled over the Midnight Spoon. But the reprieve was short-lived. By sunrise, when the first rays of light crept through the grimy windows, the remaining employees were found in a state of utter shock. Their eyes were vacant, their movements sluggish, as if their very souls had been drained during the night. They murmured in fragmented sentences about endless darkness, ghostly figures serving tables in the shadows, and a curse too terrible to escape. Ethan, still clutching the diary, stared at his reflection in a smudged mirror. He saw not just his own face, but the faint outlines of those long-forgotten souls, etched around his eyes and in the hollows of his cheeks. He knew that the endless night had taken its toll on him and his co-workers. They were now bound to this place, haunted by the memories of a past that would never let them go. In the days that followed, whispers of the night's horrors spread throughout Red Hollow. The Midnight Spoon, once a beacon for late-night diners, became a place of dread and sorrow, a monument to the suffering of both the living and the dead. And though the employees tried to carry on, the shadow of that endless night clung to them like a curse, a constant reminder that some nights are not meant to end. Ethan never forgot that fateful shift. The diary, with its terrible secrets, remained his constant companion, a chilling testament to the night when the endless hunger of lost souls had been unleashed. And each time the lights flickered at midnight, he could still hear the anguished cries of those who never found peace, echoing through the halls of the Midnight Spoon.